It was 2 in the morning when I woke up shaking. My blood sugar had dropped again. It happens sometimes when I take my medication too late. I shuffled to the kitchen, barefoot, still half asleep, hoping to find something simple, maybe a slice of bread or the leftover soup from dinner. But when I reached the fridge, I stopped. There, glinting under the dull yellow light, was a silver padlock clamped across the handles. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. I tugged gently. It didn't move. The cold metal bit into my palm. I blinked at it, disbelieving. A padlock on the refrigerator. My refrigerator. Looking for something? I turned around. My daughter-in-law, Emily, stood in the doorway, wearing her satin robe, arms crossed. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Emily, why is there a lock on the fridge?" She sighed as if she were talking to a child. "Doctor said you shouldn't snack late at night. You know how dangerous that can be at your age." "My doctor never said." "Maybe you just don't remember," she cut in, smiling. "Don't worry, I'm helping you stay healthy." I stared at her, trying to find words. The kitchen that I had paid half to remodel suddenly felt foreign, like someone else's house. My stomach churned, not from hunger this time, but from humiliation. I had lived through lean years, raised a son on one income, fed an entire neighborhood during hard winters, and now I was standing in my own home, being told I couldn't eat without permission. "Good night, Margaret," she said, flicking off the light before walking away. The lock clicked once more, as if to underline her words. I stayed there a moment, in the dim glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds, listening to the soft hum of the locked fridge. I could smell the soup I'd made earlier. I'd simmered it for hours, thinking it would stretch for a few days. It was only a few feet away, yet completely out of reach. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, a quiet rage I hadn't felt in years. I could have yelled. I could have woken my son, but I didn't. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the small leather notebook I kept in my nightstand. I wrote the date, the time, and just one sentence. She locked the fridge. Then I put down the pen and stared at the wall until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. That night, something else locked inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but a decision. When my husband died, silence became a kind of companion. For 38 years, Harold and I shared every breakfast, every evening news broadcast, every small comfort that made a house feel alive. After the funeral, the silence turned from gentle to heavy. My son, David, began calling more often, checking in, reminding me to eat, offering to fix the creaking gate Harold had promised to mend. Then, one Sunday over lunch, Emily smiled and said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big old place. We've got a spare room, and the kids would love having you around. Think about it." I hesitated. I loved my home, the lilac bushes, the bookshelves Harold built for me. When I retired from the school library, the view of the park across the street. But Emily's tone was kind, and David looked genuinely hopeful. He added, "It'll just be for company. You'll have your own space." A month later, I moved into their house at the edge of town. A wide, neat place with an open kitchen that smelled of new paint and ambition. The first weeks were pleasant. Emily made coffee couilloned for us both in the mornings, and David would joke about how the house finally felt complete. When they decided to remodel the kitchen, I offered to help. I had some savings and I wanted to contribute. "Don't be silly," Emily said at first. But when I insisted, she smiled. "If it makes you happy." So I paid half the bill. I didn't mind. Family helps family. The new kitchen gleamed. Pale countertops, chrome handles, a smart fridge that could talk to your phone. I thought it was marvelous. I baked cookies and labeled the jars just like I used to in the library. Sugar, flour, oats. For a while, we felt like a proper family again. But warmth can cool quietly, the way summer fades into autumn before you notice the chill. It began with little things. Emily started making meal plans for me, taping them to the fridge with neat handwriting. Breakfast, oatmeal, lunch, salad, dinner, soup. She said it was to keep your health balanced. I appreciated the thought, but soon she began removing the bread from the pantry and locking certain cupboards. "Too many carbs," she said lightly. When I reached for the jam one morning, she laughed. "Mom, you're so forgetful. That's for David's diet week." I smiled, but something inside me sank. I'd always believed kindness came from trust, not supervision. One afternoon, I went to the market to buy groceries for a pie. Apples and butter, simple things. When I tried to pay, my card was declined. Confused, I called the bank from the parking lot. They said the account had been merged with a family card for convenience. Emily's name was on it now. That evening, I asked her about it. She smiled as if she'd expected the question. "Oh, don't worry, Margaret. I'm just helping you manage things. You said you get anxious about online banking." I hadn't said that, but I didn't argue. Arguing with Emily felt like walking into fog. Soft at first, then smothering. The house stayed spotless, but quieter. My laughter felt too loud in it. David worked long hours. When he was home, Emily spoke for both of them. She'd pour him wine, update him on bills and errands, and I would sit quietly, smiling at the right moments, invisible in my own kitchen. One night after they went to bed, I stood in the hallway, looking at the closed door of their room, listening to the faint hum of the smart fridge. I thought about Harold, about how he used to say that respect is a house's foundation. Once you crack it, everything else shifts. I went back to my room and opened my notebook again. I'd been writing small notes since the move, grocery lists, reminders, memories. That night, I added a new kind of entry. Monday, August 4th, card replaced without notice, pantry locked, meal plan posted, David unaware. I closed the book and slid it under my pillow. David was always busy now, running meetings, answering emails. Whenever I tried to mention small things, the missing groceries, the locked cupboards, he'd smile and say, "Mom, Emily's just being protective. She worries about you." So I stopped mentioning it. Instead, I started noticing patterns. The times she locked the cupboards, the way she checked the fridge after I used it, how she always knew what I ate. I wrote them all down. Not out of anger, not yet, but because the librarian in me believed in keeping records. Some nights, when the silence felt thick and watchful, I'd whisper to myself, "Control never starts with a lock. It starts with a tone of voice." And in that quiet house, I began to listen more carefully. The changes came so slowly at first that I almost convinced myself they weren't happening. A missing item here, a casual explanation there. One morning, I reached for the tin of biscuits I kept beside the kettle, only to find the tin light and hollow. Emily smiled from across the counter. "Oh, those? I put them away. Too much sugar for you." A few days later, she began measuring the milk each morning, pouring exactly half a cup into a small jug before setting it aside for me. "Doctor said moderation," she said cheerfully. It sounded like kindness, but it felt like custody. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, she was busy, managing the house, working part-time from home. Maybe she was just being organized. But one evening, while she was out running errands, I opened the fridge to find post-it notes stuck to every shelf. Dinner only, for David, do not touch. I closed the door and just stared at my reflection in the glossy surface. For a moment, I didn't see myself. I saw the librarian version of me who used to scold 12-year-olds for talking during reading hour. The woman who ran a whole building of books, perfectly cataloged, perfectly calm. That woman would never have let someone else label her shelves. When the first credit card statement arrived, I finally noticed something worse. The grocery bills, every delivery order, and supermarket charge were all coming from my pension account. I hadn't realized Emily had linked it to the new shared card she'd set up. I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses, studying the printout. It wasn't the money that stung, it was the deceit. The quiet assumption that I wouldn't notice, or that even if I did, I wouldn't do anything about it. That night, when I opened the fridge for a glass of water, I heard the faint jingle of metal. There it was, a small padlock threaded through the handles. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the cold vibrate through the steel. Inside, I could see the faint glow of the light, mocking me. In the morning, I asked casually, "Emily, why's there a lock on the fridge?" "Oh, that," she said, brushing crumbs from the counter. "It's temporary. The fridge app lets you control temperature remotely, and the kids keep changing the settings. This is just to keep things consistent until I fix the password." I smiled politely, but I knew that wasn't the truth. Later, when she left for yoga, I tried opening the app on the family tablet. A message blinked on the screen. Access restricted. Admin only. Admin, Emily. The next week, the power bill arrived, and that's when I made a small discovery that felt like a punch to the stomach. The name on the account wasn't mine anymore. Electric Services, primary account holder, Emily Ross. I called the company. The operator said cheerfully, "Oh yes, Mrs. Ross moved your details into a joint plan for better rates. You should have received an email confirmation." I hadn't. That afternoon, I walked through the house with my phone, taking quiet pictures. The lock on the fridge, the post-it notes, the missing biscuits tin, the electric bill. Each click of the camera made my chest a little lighter. Not out of joy, but relief. Proof was solid. Proof couldn't be twisted. When I returned to my room, I plugged in my old laptop and began emailing everything to myself. Subject line, just in case. Then I sat back, watching the cursor blink on the screen, thinking about the years I'd spent teaching teenagers who thought they could get away with anything. They'd try to slip cheat notes under desks or swap library passes. I'd always smile when they got caught, not cruelly, just knowingly. I understood young people. They test limits because they think they're invincible. Emily was no teenager, but the arrogance felt familiar. Later that evening, when David came home, I thought of saying something. He hugged me distractedly, kissed Emily's cheek, and collapsed on the couch. He looked exhausted. I decided against it. The timing wasn't right. I made him tea quietly. When I set the cup down, Emily intercepted it. "No sugar, right?" she said brightly, as if I were invisible between them. David nodded, scrolling through his phone. "You're the best," he murmured. Emily smiled. "Someone has to take care of him." I stood there for a moment, teacup in hand, then turned back to my room. The hallway felt colder than usual. In my notebook I wrote, milk rationed, fridge locked, account switched, photos saved. Then I added something new, a whisper I'd never written down before, just for myself. If they think I'm weak, I wrote in slow, steady letters. They've never seen me teach teenagers for 40 years. The morning it happened, the house was still. I had gotten used to the quiet by then, the kind that doesn't soothe, only listens. I shuffled into the kitchen as the first gray light came through the blinds. My head felt heavy, my mouth dry. I reached for the kettle to make tea, but when I pressed the switch, nothing happened. I bent closer. The cord was gone. I checked the outlet, the counter, even the drawer where we kept batteries and spare bulbs. Nothing. Emily appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, her hair perfectly neat. "Oh, I took that off," she said with her usual calm smile. "The kettle uses too much power. We can't afford to waste electricity when you only need a cup or two." "It's not about wasting power, Emily. I need my morning tea. It helps me keep my sugar steady." She sighed. "Then have water. It's healthier anyway." The way she said it, the casual dismissal, made something tighten inside me. But I only nodded and said, "Of course." By mid-morning, my hands were trembling. I thought it was nerves until the room started spinning. I remember gripping the counter, the hum of the fridge blurring into the ringing in my ears. Then I was on the floor, dizzy, cold, staring at the sunlight crawling across the tiles. When I opened my eyes again, Emily was standing over me, holding her phone. "You scared me," she said, as if I'd done it on purpose. "I almost called an ambulance." "You should have," I whispered. She shrugged. "You're fine now. Maybe it's time we see a neurologist. You've been forgetting things lately." The words cut deeper than the fall. Forgetting things. Later that day, I went to my doctor. He frowned when I told him what happened, his pen pausing over the clipboard. "Margaret, you must eat regularly. You can't skip meals, especially with your medication." "I didn't skip, doctor. I couldn't eat." He looked up. "Couldn't?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid. "My daughter-in-law manages the kitchen now. She says it's for my health." He pursed his lips, then wrote something on his pad. "I'll note that in your file, that you must have regular, unsupervised access to food and fluids. That's a medical necessity." He tore off the note and handed it to me. "Keep this. If anyone interferes again, show them." When I got home, I printed a copy and folded the original into my journal, tucked between my grocery notes and old recipes. Proof. Quiet, patient proof. A few days later, the neighborhood whispers began. Mrs. Lang from across the street caught me at the mailbox. "Margaret, dear, are you feeling all right? Emily mentioned you've been a bit forgetful lately." I forced a smile. "Did she?" "Oh, she's just worried about you," Mrs. Lang said kindly. "She said you almost left the stove on last week." "I haven't cooked in weeks," I replied softly. She blinked. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood." I thanked her and went back inside, my pulse loud in my ears. That evening, when David came home, Emily greeted him at the door, loud enough for me to hear. She left the garden tap running again. I think her memory's getting worse. "Mom," David called, "everything okay?" I smiled from the sofa. "Everything's fine, dear." But inside, a cold understanding settled. She wasn't just controlling me. She was building a story, a narrative where I was the confused old woman who needed help, supervision, maybe even legal guardianship. It was clever, really. If she could convince David and the neighbors that my mind was slipping, then every cruel thing she'd done would look like kindness. Every restriction would look like protection. That night, I sat in my room with my journal open and the doctor's note beside it. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from anger. I'd seen this kind of manipulation before, not in my family, but in the world. In the school where I worked, when children bullied others quietly, not with fists, but with words. It always began with planting doubt. I thought of Harold, my husband, steady, practical Harold. He'd always said, if someone tries to make you question your own memory, that's when you know you're in danger. I whispered into the empty room, I hear you, love, I hear you. The next morning, while Emily was out running errands, I went through my old address book. My fingers stopped at a name I hadn't seen in years. Mr. Jensen, attorney at law. Harold's old fishing partner. They used to sit on the porch after church, swapping stories and fixing things neither of them needed to fix. I remembered Mr. Jensen's warm laugh and sharp mind. I had attended his retirement luncheon 5 years ago. He had told me then, if you ever need advice, Margaret, you know where to find me. I found his number and dialed. Jensen Residence, a calm voice answered. Hello, it's Margaret Hale. I don't know if you remember me. There was a pause, then a surprised chuckle. Of course I remember you, Margaret. How's Harold? I closed my eyes. Gone, I'm afraid. Another pause. I'm sorry to hear that. What can I do for you? I hesitated. I think someone's trying to take away more than just my kitchen, Mr. Jensen. His tone changed immediately. Tell me everything. And for the first time in months, I did. Every locked door, every missing item, every quiet cruelty that had built up like frost on the walls. When I finished, he said softly, You did the right thing calling me. Let's meet tomorrow morning. I'll look over your documents. And Margaret? Yes? Don't confront her, not yet. Just keep writing everything down. After I hung up, I sat for a long while, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My pulse steadied, my fear turned into something clearer, resolve. Emily thought she was preparing the world to see me as helpless, but I had just called a man who knew how to turn silence into evidence. And for the first time in weeks, I felt safe enough to sleep. Mr. Jensen's office smelled of leather and dust, just like the old courthouse I used to take my students to on field trips. His desk was cluttered with papers, but his mind was sharp as ever. He listened quietly while I explained everything. How I had paid for the kitchen remodel, how the utilities had been changed, how Emily was slowly making me disappear from my own life. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and took off his glasses. Margaret, he said gently, you've got more power here than you think. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and asked, Do you still have the documents from when you sold your house and moved in with David? I handed him the folder I'd kept in a plastic sleeve since the move, deed papers, receipts, the transfer slip from my savings. He flipped through them quickly, tapping the corner of one page. Here, he said, sliding it toward me. You see this clause? You didn't just give them money for renovations. You invested directly in the property. That makes you a co-owner, 50%. I blinked at the document, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. Co-owner? Yes, you're not a guest in that house, Margaret. You legally own half of it. and that means no one can control your access, your space, or your utilities without your consent. The weight of those words was almost too much to take in. All this time, I'd been treated like an inconvenience, and yet half the roof over their heads was mine. Mr. Jensen smiled kindly. "You've been too polite for your own good, but now we'll start doing things properly." He picked up the phone and dialed someone. "I'm sending you a client, Sarah," he said into the receiver. "Elder protection case. You'll like her. She's tougher than she looks." He hung up. "That's Ms. Cole," he said. "One of the best elder rights attorneys in the state. She's young, but she fights like a lioness." The next morning, I met Ms. Cole in her small office downtown. She wore glasses and had the kind of calm energy that made you trust her before she spoke. She offered me tea, which made me smile. It was the first cup I'd had freely in weeks. She listened to my story without interrupting, her pen moving swiftly across a notepad. When I finished, she said, "We'll start with evidence. No emotions, just facts. That's how we win." Together, we began to build the case. I laid out the photos I'd taken on her desk, the padlock on the fridge, the missing kettle cord, the post-it notes claiming what I could or couldn't eat. Each image felt like a confession, not of mine, but of hers. Then we gathered the documents, bank withdrawals from my pension, showing grocery purchases I hadn't made, utility bills in Emily's name, and the doctor's note recommending unsupervised access to food. Ms. Cole nodded approvingly. "These are strong, very strong." "What happens next?" I asked. "We file 2 things," she said. "First, a temporary protective order that'll legally prevent them from restricting your access to the kitchen or finances. Second, a petition to enforce co-ownership rights, which will remind your daughter-in-law that she can't treat you like a tenant in your own home." Her tone was calm but firm, the way I used to sound in the library when breaking up a fight between students. I felt a strange comfort in her professionalism. Over the next week, I visited her twice more to sign papers. She sent notices to the bank, the power company, and the court clerk's office. Every signature I made felt like reclaiming a part of myself. At home, I stayed silent. I went about my days as though nothing had changed. Emily continued her small cruelties, unaware that every word, every gesture, was now part of a growing legal storm. She still rationed milk, still commented about forgetfulness, still spoke for me when David was around. I said nothing. I smiled, thanked her for her help, and wrote the day's events in my journal each night. One evening, she mentioned casually, "You know, David and I might sell this house next year. It's getting too big for us. Maybe you could move into one of those nice assisted living communities?" I looked at her over my teacup. "Oh, really? I suppose we'll both have to sign the sale papers then." She laughed, not realizing what I meant. "Oh, Margaret, that's not how it works." But it was. A few days later, the first letter arrived, sealed with the county's insignia. Emily was too curious not to open it when it came in the mail. I watched her eyes flick over the page, her confident smile fading. "What's this?" she demanded, voice sharp. I took the paper gently from her hands. "Just a court notification, nothing you need to worry about." She stood there in stunned silence as I folded the document neatly and tucked it into my notebook. That night, I could hear her pacing in the hallway. David tried to calm her, his voice low and confused. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." But I knew it wasn't. While they whispered behind closed doors, I sat in my room, reading over the printed petition Ms. Cole had filed that morning. My name looked strong in the header, Margaret Hale, co-owner and plaintiff. For weeks, I had felt small, invisible, diminished by the soft cruelty of control. Now, holding that document, I felt seen again. The papers moved forward quickly. Ms. Cole called to tell me the court had granted the temporary protective order. Emily was now legally forbidden from locking any part of the kitchen or restricting my food. "Don't provoke her," Ms. Cole warned. "Just stay calm. The more ordinary you act, the more her behavior will stand out." So I did. I made tea again, left the fridge open a few minutes longer than necessary, and smiled when Emily frowned. I no longer wrote my notes out of fear, but out of habit, quiet entries of progress, filed with Ms. Cole. Order granted. Stay calm. The next morning, as I poured myself a full cup of tea, for the first time in months, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me didn't look weak or fragile. She looked patient, focused, and quietly certain of what was coming. For the first time since Harold's death, I whispered something he used to tell me whenever things felt unfair. "Truth doesn't shout, Margaret. It waits." And now I was done waiting for permission. The first insult came in the same gentle tone Emily used for everything cruel. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She was wiping the counter when she said, almost casually, "You know, Margaret, maybe you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age. Assisted living has group activities and meals at regular hours. It would take a lot off David's mind." I looked up from my cup of tea. "Are you suggesting I move out of my home?" She gave a small, pitying laugh. "Oh, come now, don't say you're home. It's ours, isn't it? We all have to share responsibility." Her voice was sugar, but her eyes were ice. "I've managed responsibility for 70 years, I said softly. "Well," she said, turning back to the sink, "sometimes people lose track of what they can manage." I felt something twist in my chest, not anger, not fear, but that quiet kind of sorrow that comes when you finally see someone as they really are. When she left the room, I set my phone on the table and pressed record. I wanted to hear her words later, to be sure I hadn't imagined them. When she returned, I asked, "Emily, could you repeat what you said about assisted living? I didn't quite catch it." She looked at me with that sharp smile. "I said maybe it's time you thought about a place better suited for people who forget things." Her words hung in the air like smoke. That evening, after they'd gone to bed, I opened the small pillbox Emily insisted on organizing for me each week. It was one of those plastic kinds, with days labeled in neat letters. I checked the Friday slot, something I rarely did before. 2 pills stared back at me, wrong shapes, wrong colors. One was David's cholesterol tablet, the other a sleeping pill. My heart raced. I sat very still, staring at the pills. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe not. I closed the lid and took a picture with my phone, timestamp clear. Then I wrapped the pillbox in a napkin and placed it inside my drawer. In the morning, I called Ms. Cole. She listened without interruption, her tone steady but clipped. "You did the right thing by not confronting her. Don't touch anything. I'll arrange a wellness inspection today. Do you feel safe staying there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm safer than she thinks." That afternoon, 2 people arrived in plain clothes, a social worker named Mrs. Dalton and a community nurse. Emily opened the door, surprised. "What's this about?" she demanded. "It's a routine elder wellness check," Mrs. Dalton said pleasantly. "We received a referral from your family's attorney." "My attorney?" "I believe the case was filed under Ms. Hale's co-ownership petition," the woman said. "It's standard." Emily's smile faltered. They walked through the house quietly, taking notes. I stayed near the doorway, answering questions calmly. When Mrs. Dalton reached the kitchen, she stopped at the fridge and tilted her head. "Is this padlock typical?" Emily stammered. "It's for safety. She forgets to close it sometimes." Mrs. Dalton crouched, scribbling something in her notebook. "I see. And the kettle cord?" Emily flushed. "Energy efficiency. We conserve power here." The nurse checked my medication box. She took one look at the pills and raised an eyebrow. "These aren't prescribed for you, Mrs. Hale." Emily stepped forward. "That's impossible. She must have mixed them up herself." The nurse sealed the pillbox in a small evidence bag and handed it to Mrs. Dalton. "We'll sort this out properly." By the time they left, Emily's face was stiff with fury. She slammed drawers, muttering under her breath. When David came home, she cornered him immediately. "Your mother's trying to destroy me," she said loud enough for me to hear. "She called inspectors in our home." David rubbed his temples. "What inspectors?" "Ask her," Emily snapped, pointing toward me. David turned, confused. "Mom, what's going on?" I stood from the armchair, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the carpet. I spoke slowly, my voice steady. "There's nothing going on that shouldn't be. I'm simply letting the law decide what's fair." "Law? Mom, what are you talking about?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You'll see soon enough, dear. The court will tell us." He looked from me to Emily, clearly torn, caught between his wife's indignation and the quiet certainty in my voice. That night, the house felt smaller. Emily didn't speak to me, not even at dinner. David tried to fill the silence, asking about my old teaching days, but every word seemed to bounce off the walls. I excused myself early and went to my room. The next morning, the doorbell rang. A courier handed me a thick envelope stamped with the county seal. Summons and notice of hearing. I turned it over in my hands, the paper crisp, official. My name was there, Margaret Hale, plaintiff. Emily hovered in the hallway, trying to read my expression. "What is that?" she asked. "Just a letter," I said. "From the court." Her jaw tightened. "About what?" "About ownership," I said softly, "and about truth." I walked back to my room, leaving her standing there, pale with confusion and fear. Inside, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I wrote one new line under the others. Evidence gathered, witnesses found. The law is awake now. I closed the notebook and smiled faintly. For months, she had built her cage around me with locks, rules, and soft-spoken lies. Now the door was opening, and she didn't even know it yet. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered the words I'd been waiting to say aloud. "We'll let the court decide." The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and old air. The kind of place where truth moved slowly, like dust caught in a sunbeam. I hadn't been inside one since I testified at a school board hearing 20 years ago. But this was different. This time, I wasn't a witness for someone else's story. I was standing inside my own. When the bailiff called my name, Margaret Hale versus Emily Ross, my legs trembled, but my hands were steady. Ms. Cole touched my arm lightly. "You've already done the hard part, Margaret," she whispered. "Now we just show them." The courtroom was small but full. The clerk at the front, the judge behind his high oak bench, and a handful of quiet onlookers. I caught David's eyes as I entered. He looked exhausted, dark circles, tie slightly crooked. He gave a small nod, unsure which side to belong to. Then Emily walked in. She looked like a portrait of concern, hair perfectly arranged, soft pastel cardigan, pearls. Her expression was sculpted pity. When she saw me, she gave a fragile smile, the kind designed for sympathy, not love. Miss Cole leaned in. She's going for the misunderstood caregiver angle. Let her. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. My name, my age, the nature of the petition. When the clerk asked if I wished to make a statement, I shook my head. My attorney will speak for me. My voice was calm, but every word scraped against the ache of months of silence. Emily's lawyer, a smooth, confident man in a gray suit, began first. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case of abuse. It's a misunderstanding between family members. My client has cared for Mrs. Hale as one would for a parent. Any measures taken, food management, account consolidation, were for her well-being." He turned toward me, smiling politely. "We have reason to believe Mrs. Hale's memory has declined in recent months." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I said nothing. Miss Cole placed a folder gently on the table. "We'll let the facts speak." The judge, an older man with sharp eyes, nodded. "Proceed." The first exhibit, photographs. Miss Cole handed them up, printed on glossy paper, time-stamped, clear as confession. The padlock on the refrigerator, the post-it notes claiming shelves, the missing kettle cord, the pillbox with wrong tablets. The judge studied each photo for a long moment before looking up. "Mrs. Ross, are these your doing?" Emily smiled sweetly. "Yes, Your Honor, but only to protect her. Margaret often forgets to close the fridge. Once she left milk out overnight. We were afraid she'd make herself sick." Ms. Cole didn't flinch. "Understood. Now Exhibit B." The doctor's note, a simple line written in blue ink. "Patient must eat regularly to maintain blood sugar. Restricting meals may be hazardous." The judge read it twice. "Duly noted." Then came the financials, the quiet theft of trust hidden in spreadsheets. Ms. Cole displayed the printouts on the screen. Recurring grocery deliveries charged to my pension. Electric bills moved into Emily's name. Bank withdrawals in unfamiliar handwriting. Emily interjected, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "Your Honor, I handled finances because Margaret asked me to. She said computers confused her." I leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Your Honor," I said softly, "I spent 30 years managing a library database with 400,000 records." A murmur rippled through the room. Then came the sound that silenced everything, my recording. Ms. Cole pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, bright and cruel. "Maybe you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age. Assisted living has meals on time." Then the second part. "It's not your home, Margaret. It's ours." The judge's expression hardened. "When was this recorded?" 2 weeks before the protective order was filed, Your Honor," Ms. Cole said. Emily's lawyer objected. "Taken without consent." But the judge waved him off. "It's admissible in a civil protection case. Continue." Next came the social worker's report, methodical, professional, damning. Mrs. Dalton's statement was read aloud. Fridge secured with padlock. Medication box contained incorrect prescriptions. Environment restrictive and unsafe for elders' well-being. The words "unsafe for elders' well-being" echoed like a bell toll. Emily's mask cracked for the first time. "That's absurd," she burst out. She mixed her own pills. She's always been dramatic. Mrs. Ross. The judge's voice was low but cutting. You'll speak when addressed. Silence. Ms. Cole took a quiet breath. Your Honor, we could end here, but we have one more piece of evidence that will clarify who had control. She opened her laptop and connected it to the court screen. Exhibit G, Smart Fridge Access Logs. A table appeared. Date, time, device name, user ID. Each entry was labeled Admin, Emily Ross, Mobile. Dozens of them, every day for months, adjusting access settings, temperature controls, lock times. This data was subpoenaed directly from the manufacturer, Ms. Cole explained. It shows exactly who enabled the restrictions. Mrs. Ross's phone logged in 78 times to lock the refrigerator. Emily's mouth opened, then closed. She looked to her lawyer, but his expression had gone pale. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Ross, would you like to explain why you repeatedly locked a shared kitchen appliance in a home co-owned by the plaintiff? Emily stammered. It was for her safety. Her safety, the judge repeated, while also transferring her funds, removing her name from utilities, and controlling her medication. The room went still. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miss Cole turned, to him gently. Mr. Ross, may I ask, did you know about any of this? David swallowed hard. His eyes darted between his wife and me. I saw the locks, he said finally, voice breaking. But I thought it didn't matter. I thought it was just temporary. You thought it didn't matter, the judge repeated, tone heavy with disbelief. Mr. Ross, your mother helped fund your home, did she not? Yes, sir. And you allowed her access to food and medicine to be restricted? David's voice cracked. I didn't know how bad it was. I swear I didn't. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet of order. It was the heavy stillness of realization. The truth had filled the room so completely that there was no space left for excuses. Emily folded her arms, eyes burning. She's making me out to be a monster. I took care of her. The judge looked down at the photographs again, then at the trembling man beside her. Mrs. Ross, care and control are not the same thing. What I see here is not care, it's coercion. He paused, letting the words sink in. We will recess for lunch. When we return, I will deliver my ruling. The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. As people stood and shuffled out, I remained seated, watching the dust dance in the sunlight. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. For months I had lived under locks, metal ones, digital ones, invisible ones made of silence. Now, for the first time, the lock was on her side of the door. Ms. Cole leaned close and whispered, You did beautifully. I smiled faintly, fingers pressed together in my lap. No, I said quietly. Truth did. When we returned from recess, the air inside the courtroom felt heavier, like everyone had realized this wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a reckoning. The judge walked back in, his robe brushing the floor, expression unreadable. All rise, we did. I heard the faint rustle of paper, the creak of benches, and the ticking of the old clock above the flag. The judge sat, folded his hands, and looked first at me, then at Emily. He removed his glasses and began to speak slowly, every word deliberate. Mrs. Hale, he said, his tone both gentle and grave, no one, and I mean no one, should ever need permission to eat in their own kitchen. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. He turned toward Emily. This court does not see nutrition control. It does not see forgetfulness or misplaced care. What it sees is cruelty, disguised as compassion, a pattern of humiliation dressed as responsibility. Emily's lawyer shifted uneasily. She stared down at her folded hands, her face pale and rigid. The judge continued, his voice growing stronger. We live in an age where people talk a great deal about caring for their elders, about dignity, health, and safety. But true care, he said, tapping a finger on the bench, does not come with a lock. He reached for the case file beside him. The evidence presented before this court, the photographs, the financial records, the recordings, the witness reports, all point to one conclusion: systematic neglect under the guise of assistance. David's head hung low, his jaw tight. Emily looked as if she wanted to speak, but the judge raised a hand. Mrs. Ross, you had every opportunity to defend your actions. Instead, you tried to redefine them. You took a woman's independence, her finances, her food, and even her medication, and called it caregiving. A murmur passed through the small audience. The judge continued. Therefore, the court finds Emily Ross guilty of elder neglect under the state's Elder Protection Act. The words struck like a bell, clear, final, echoing through the silent room. He turned to me again. Mrs. Hale, this court acknowledges your rightful ownership of the home. Effective immediately, you're granted exclusive residential rights for 6 months, with the option to extend. Your daughter-in-law and her belongings are to be removed from the premises within 72 hours. Emily gasped softly. You can't. The judge cut her off. You will also be required to complete 150 hours of community service at the County Senior Meal Center. Perhaps there, you'll learn what nourishment actually looks like. Her lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the judge's glare silenced him. As for the financial side, he continued, flipping a page, all pension withdrawals made from Mrs. Hale's account without written authorization are to be repaid in full with interest. This court orders restitution within 90 days. David raised his head, eyes wide. Your Honor, please. The judge softened slightly. Mr. Ross, your silence allowed this to happen, but the court recognizes that silence born of confusion is not the same as intent. Still, you bear a duty, both as a son and as a man. Therefore, the court strongly recommends counseling, individual and family, under supervision of the Department of Family Services. David nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. Emily sat motionless, her eyes glistening, lips pressed tight. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. The judge's tone shifted from judicial to reflective. He looked down at his notes, then back at me. Mrs. Hale, he said, I have served on this bench for 27 years. I've seen sons steal from mothers, daughters hide inheritance, and caretakers turn compassion into currency. But yours. He paused. Yours is different. You didn't come here out of vengeance. You came here because you wanted your dignity back, and perhaps even your family. I blinked, my eyes burning. Yes, Your Honor, I whispered. He nodded, and that matters. He placed his glasses on the desk beside him. You once taught young minds, didn't you? I did, I said softly, for 40 years. Then you'll understand when I say this. Sometimes the hardest lessons come late, but they last the longest. He turned to Emily again. Mrs. Ross, you thought you were teaching your mother-in-law a lesson about obedience. Instead, you taught the world a lesson about control. Today, that ends. He leaned back, his voice lowering but still carrying through the room. Some locks need keys, others need truth. Consider yours opened. The gavel came down once, echoing like thunder. Court adjourned. The crowd stirred, benches creaking as people began to leave. I stayed seated for a moment, frozen, my hands clasped around the folder in my lap. It was over, not just the case, but the long, invisible battle for something as simple as the right to live without fear. David approached slowly, his eyes red. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't know how bad it was." I met his gaze. "You didn't want to know." He nodded, ashamed. "I'll make it right." "I hope so," I said gently. "For your own sake, not mine." Emily didn't come near me. She gathered her purse, her pearls, her dignity, or what was left of it, and walked out without a word. Ms. Cole touched my shoulder. "Justice doesn't always sound loud," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's just steady." Outside, the sunlight was bright, blinding almost. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, feeling the air move through me like something I'd forgotten how to do. People passed by without knowing what had just happened inside. That somewhere between paper and truth, a small door had unlocked. David caught up to me at the curb. "Do you want me to drive you home?" I smiled faintly. "No, thank you. I think I'd like to walk." He nodded, stepping back. I turned and began down the street, my cane tapping softly on the pavement, each step lighter than the one before. For months, my world had been confined to padlocks and whispers. Now the locks were gone, and what replaced them wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I paused at the corner, looking up at the sky, then murmured to myself, "Some locks need keys, others need truth." And at last I had both. The house feels different now. Not larger, not quieter, just free. Morning light spills across the kitchen tiles, the way it used to before everything got complicated. The kettle hums again, soft and steady, and I leave the fridge door open while I reach for butter. No alarms, no passwords, no permission needed. The first cup of tea after the ruling tasted like victory and memory at once. I sat at the table, the same one where Emily once rationed my sugar, and stirred a spoonful in just because I could. The sound of that small clink felt louder than any gavel. David visits almost every afternoon now. He knocks before coming in, a new habit that says more than any apology. He fixes shelves, checks the mail, and always brings flowers from the market. We talk about simple things, his work, the neighbors, the weather. Sometimes he stares at the kettle like it's proof that normal still exists. Emily hasn't come back. The court ordered her to complete community service at the senior meal center downtown. Every week, I receive an envelope from her, handwritten, no return address. The first letter was defensive, full of explanations. The second, quieter. The third simply said, "I'm sorry. I haven't answered yet." Some apologies need to sit in silence for a while before they're ready to be forgiven. But forgiveness will come. It has to, or else the locks stay inside. I live on my own now. With my pension restored, I started something new, a small program I call Meals for Dignity. It began with 3 deliveries a week, warm food for older neighbors who live alone. Now, with a few volunteers and Ms. Cole's help, we've grown to 20. We don't just bring meals, we bring company, stories, reminders that independence and kindness can live side by side. Sometimes, when I carry the trays into the van, I catch myself smiling at how simple it all is. How easy freedom can look when you've known the weight of control. In the evenings, I bake while the radio hums. I keep the windows open, the kettle warm, and the fridge door wide as I move around my kitchen. Every corner of this house feels like a promise kept, and maybe that's all justice really is, a promise returned to its rightful owner. As I sit with my tea, I think of what the judge said that day. Some locks need keys, others need truth. Forgiveness doesn't erase the lock. It reminds you you'll never need one again. If a judge ever unlocked something in your life, tell me your story and which city you're listening from.